And raise your hand, and if you need anything,
Yeah.
you can see me.
Oh, great. Well, I'm happy to see you guys, and look forward to discussing Jojo Rabbit, which I think is a movie that's a little bit controversial. So we'll see. I mean, I do think it. I don't know that there's a lot of people that just feel kind of about this movie. They either love it or they hate it. So we'll see what you guys think in a minute. But I'll just talk about it a little bit before we start. Just you probably already know that the writer and director is a gentleman from New Zealand. He's known as Taika Waititi, although in his family he's also known as Taika Cohen. And he also plays the character of Adolf in the movie, which I just find that interesting that that's the way it's written in the credits. He doesn't play Adolf Hitler, he just plays Adolf, which I think says something about the movie and what he had in mind to begin with. But so he, you may know some of his other work. I mean, if you're a fan there, the comedy team called Flight of the Conchords, he did a lot of writing and production work with them for their TV series, which I believe was on HBO. And more recently wrote a movie with one of those guys from Flight of the Conchords called What We Do in the Shadows, which is a very funny comedy about vampires, and has now become, I think, a TV series maybe on Fox, of the same name, What We Do in the Shadows. He also was a director of one of the Marvel movies a few years back that was pretty well regarded among Marvel fans, Thor Ragnarok. So he's made big movies with big budgets, and he's made small movies with small budgets, and started out in New Zealand. There aren't that many folks who make it big time out in New Zealand. So Peter Jackson, who made Lord of the Rings, is another one. There's a few, but so that's Taika Cohen. Of course, the star of the movie, this boy. I mean, this is his first movie. Roman Griffin Davis, I believe is his name, who plays Jojo. I believe he'll be in some movies coming out in the next couple of years, but this was really his first, certainly his first big role in anything. I think he's one of those kids who, from the time he was very little, was in TV commercials and things like that. So he was born in 2007. So think about the movie came out almost 3 years ago in 2019. So he's now just 14, right? So we'll see where he goes in his career. I'll mention Thomason Mckenzie is the young actress who plays Elsa, the Jewish girl in living in the wall of the house. And again, I mean, really her first major credit. She's appearing in a movie right now. I don't know if it's still in theaters or if it's online, called Last Night in Soho. I saw a lot of ads for it. I haven't seen the movie itself, but so she's going on to other things. And of course, the best known actress in the movie is Scarlett Johansson. You probably know that Scarlett Johansson's mother is Jewish and that she identifies Jewishly. She was born in 1984 in Manhattan. It's that the year this movie came out, she was actually nominated twice for the Oscar, something that doesn't happen with any frequency at all. She was nominated in the category of Best Supporting Actress for this movie, for Jojo Rabbit, and she was also nominated for Best Actress for the movie A Marriage Story. Right? So, and she's been in a number of movies over the years, and I think she's just grown and grown actually as an actress. So she's quite good. In some of the smaller parts, you probably recognized some people from one thing or another. I mean, some of them you probably don't really remember what you saw them in. I mean, if you saw the British version of the Office, the one that spawned the American TV show, then you might recognize Stephen Merchant, who plays he's really just in one scene, really, as the Gestapo leader who comes to the house to search it. A tall, skinny, odd-looking fellow. His name's Stephen Merchant. He plays Dietz in this movie. So he may look familiar because he's been in a lot of things over the years. Done a lot of things with Ricky Gervais. Just about everything that Ricky Gervais has been a part of, he's been a part of. He writes comedy as well as performing, and and you can see he's very tall. So Alfie Allen has a small, almost wordless role in this movie. He's best known for his work in Game of Thrones. So if you were a fan of that, you recognize him. But he too has been showing up with some regularity in other things as well. Rebel Wilson has been in a lot of comedies, some pretty big and well-known, like Bridesmaids and Pitch Perfect. She is actually from Australia, I believe. So, and notably Sam Rockwell in a small part in this movie. Sam Rockwell is actually an Oscar winner. He won for Best Supporting Actor a few years ago for the movie Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. He's
outside Fargo, outside
Ebbing, Missouri. That's what it's called. Yeah. Fargo is a different movie. He's not in that, actually. Right. But Three Billboards. He was also nominated a couple of years before that for playing George W. Bush in the movie Vice, where Christian Bale played Dick Cheney. So he was nominated. He's been nominated twice for Oscars. He's been nominated for some Emmys as well. And if any of you watched the show about Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon last year, he plays Bob Fosse and Fosse Verdon. So and he's been around for a long time already. I've seen him in movies going back years. Some early science fiction movies, like a movie called Moon. He's very good in that. Anyway, so an interesting conglomeration of folks ends up in this movie. As I said, Taika Waititi directed it. He wrote the screenplay along with the person who wrote the book that it's based on. It's called, her name is Christine Lunens, and the book is called Caging Skies. I'm not exactly sure how the book relates to the movie. I haven't gone back to read the book, but might be interesting to do that. So, this movie stands in a long line of movies that point a comic finger at the Second World War and at the Nazi regime, right? So some of which we've watched together, those of you who've been in film classes over the last couple of years, they're going back to Ernst Lubitsch's movie To Be or Not to Be, which was about an acting troupe in Poland and working with the Polish underground. And with the same year, really, the next year, 1940, Charlie Chaplin makes his movie, The Great Dictator, where he plays the dictator Adenoid Hinkle. You may remember that as well. So, and then, of course, going on farther into more recent times, Mel Brooks's Springtime for Hitler is unforgettable. And was quite controversial in its time, but has come to be understood as a classic now, looking back at it. And then, of course, the television shows like Hogan's Heroes, of course. So it's interesting that this movie came in for some critical complaint when it came out, that it was somehow different than those movies. And we can talk about that if you like. But I do think there are some differences, and that may be what led to some of that criticism when this came out, because in all of those other movies, we are not asked at any time to sympathize with a Nazi. Not even in Hogan's Heroes, where there's a kind of a friendship. If you remember that, the silliness of that show, Sergeant Schultz and the prisoners, his look the other way attitude, and his affection for the soldiers in his prison camp, right? But even then, I don't think we're really expected to sympathize with a Nazi. And here in this movie, we are asked to do that. We're asked to see this. Admittedly, he's a 10-year-old boy, right? He's not a grown man, but we are supposed to sympathize with him. And that, I think, was a bridge too far for some people in watching this movie. So when the movie was marketed, it actually was marketed with the tag that it was an anti-hatred movie. It was not anti-Nazi, it was anti-hate. And I think that sometimes decisions like that are made because they think it will sell more tickets, right? Sometimes they're made for other reasons, but here I think that there's a considered reason for that. This is an anti-hate movie because what it asks us to understand is that this 10-year-old boy is deluded and misguided by the situation that he finds himself in, and that once he learns something, that the way he feels about Jews, the way he feels about Nazis will change, right? And so it asks us to sympathize with him as an ignorant child who grows over the course of the movie and learns and becomes something else. And so in that sense, it's, it harkens back to even something like South Pacific. You have to be carefully taught, right? That there's a sense now it would be nice if the number one voice in his ear was his mother, who's working against the Nazi regime from within. But we know that actually 10-year-olds going into adolescence, the biggest voices in their heads are not usually their parents, right? So unfortunately, the voice that calls to him most clearly is his imaginary friend Adolf, right? So and that's the other thing, point out why I think that the character is billed as Adolf and only occasionally referred to actually as Hitler in the movie, is that he's this 10-year-old boy's imagining of what Hitler would be like, right? Among other things, I don't know that people are really quibbling with historic accuracy in this movie, but Hitler was a vegetarian and he didn't smoke. And so the fact that he keeps offering him cigarettes, and occasionally sits down to a meal of unicorn, right. It shows us that this is meant to be this child's idea of what this person is like, not in any way should it be confused with what he was actually like, right? And in fact, of course, his imagining of Hitler is a lot like a teenage, maybe even a teenage girl in this movie, right? And there's this sort of constant, the banter, right, between them. There's the scene, I think the best example is the one where he comes into his bedroom after he's been upstairs talking to the Jewish girl, and he comes in and Adolf is in his bed and gets mad at him for talking to this girl, and then says, "Did I make that weird? It shouldn't be weird, it shouldn't be weird between us, right?" I'm not such a childish thing, and it again should suggest to us that we're not supposed to take this seriously as a portrait of Adolf Hitler, but of a child's view of what his friend Adolf would be like. I mean, the early in the movie when Adolf is coaching him on how to do a Heil is perhaps another example, which is sort of part movie director and part friend, right? Coaching him to say it just right? So I think for those who don't like this movie, I mean, part of it is I think that they find it difficult, if not impossible, to sympathize, even though this is a 10-year-old boy, right? And I get that. I get why that's difficult for some people. So I do want to mention a couple of other artistic things about the movie and then perhaps open it for some discussion. But in watching it again, I mean, I saw it in the movie theaters when it came out. This was the first time I watched it again since then in preparation for this. And I was struck by a couple of things. One is I'm struck by the way the colors in the movie, early in the movie, are really oversaturated. I mean, they're quite beautiful. The compositions are lush. I mean, you know, dark, beautiful wood and bright greens and you know, really beautiful color and composition as the movie starts. And then I think that it's quite deliberate that towards the end of the movie, when the reality of war comes home to this 10-year-old for the first time, it is as if we're seeing the world through his eyes. In the beginning, everything is great, you know, he's happy. He's running around. He's happy when he's at home, you know, the bright colors at home with his mother, bright colors in the forest, bright colors in town. Towards the end, really, I would say maybe starting with the scene where he finds his mother hanging. Okay? The color is drained out of the movie. It's you know, desaturized, right? I don't know if that's a word, but but the scenes where now there's some struggle in his life, right? He's going out to get a potato if he can get it, find some food in the garbage can, right? Those kinds of things. The color is much different in the movie. And I think this is a very deliberate thing, right? Directors don't do this by accident. They may do it intuitively, but they don't do it by accident, right? So, I think that's very deliberate to show that this child is growing up, and you know, the growth is shown in it's now seeing the world not through rose-colored glasses, which in a sense you might say the early parts of the movie do in the camera work, you know, in the color, but seeing some reality, right? The only place the color is still saturated at that point in the movie is when he's at home talking to Elsa, right? Which, right? So now everything has shifted. So the world of Germany has become drab and colorless, and the world of the conversation with Elsa, the Jew, Elsa, the girl that he's fallen in love with, you know, those things, that's a very deliberate and I think very evocative act on the part of the director. The other thing I'll mention from the screenplay, and I'm not as sure what to make about this, is that there is constant mention of all different kinds of animals all throughout this movie. So of course its title is Jojo Rabbit, and you know, it's easy to know where that comes from. Of course, Johannes is Jojo, and he's called a rabbit because he's scared like a rabbit in that horrible scene where they tell him they want him to kill this bunny, right? But if you remember, before he goes out there into the forest, there's this whole conversation with Adolf, who's you know, telling him what kind of an animal to be. You know, he should have, I think it's snake body and panther strength, and I may have those animals mixed up a bit, but you know, there's all these other animals that he's supposed to be. And then when he gets out there and he's the rabbit, then there's this conversation about you know, be the rabbit, right? That you know, the rabbit is brave and sneaky and strong, right? And so, but more than that, there's just animals all the time in this movie, conversations about all kinds of animals, including the unicorn that Adolf is going to have for dinner, right? So I'm not entirely sure what to do with all of that, except that there is this sense that, right, one of the things they keep talking about is Jews are animals, and you know, there's a lot of talk about people not actually being people. So I think there's something interesting in that. I'm not sure. Maybe I can't interpret it. Maybe it's just an accident, But I think there's something to it, that there's all this mention of animals in here. So I thought I'd mention it to you as well. So I will say that I am a fan. So I don't know what folks on the call think, and I'd love to hear, but I think it's a thought out piece. The world of Germany in that time is probably far more complicated than we really think about, because we prefer to have things in black and white. Everybody was either good or evil, and the truth is that within Germany and within the lands that Germany conquered, there was a variety of reactions, and there were certainly the underground movements, but there were also things like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the confessing church in Germany, people who ended up at some point or another being put to death because of their help to their love of Germany, but their hatred of Nazis, right? And so it's a far more complicated picture. And maybe we should talk about the music a little bit as well, right? There is a soundtrack to this movie, but the most evocative things are the pieces of music that get used throughout the movie. Some of them contemporary with the times in the 1940s, others not so. I mean, one of the ones right from the beginning is the Beatles singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in German, right? Which they actually did. This is not something that was made for the movie. "Komm, gib mir deine Hand" was in the early days of the Beatles. If you're a Beatles aficionado like I am, you know that they often played at a club in Berlin, right? The short trip from Liverpool to Berlin, and so some of the songs that they wrote, they learned to sing in German. So "Komm, gib mir deine Hand" appears on, I think, the record Beatles 65 in 1965 in America. And there's a second one too, "Sie liebt dich," which is "She loves you" in German, right? So that's used at the beginning of this movie. Under the music, you're seeing films, archival films of Hitler Youth, right? And you're hearing not just the Beatles singing, but I think the screams and shouts are from the Beatles fans, of the early 1960s. So you have this sort of interpretation of what being a part of the Hitler Youth was like. It was like being a fan, like being a Beatles fan, and in some sense, just lucky that the things that some people followed, like the Beatles, are as joyful and probably benign as they are, rather than something that leads people down a path towards something evil. So at the very end of the movie, there's another modern pop song, David Bowie singing the song "Heroes" in German, which is also actually David Bowie singing that song. He wrote that song in Berlin in the 1970s, somewhere around 1976, I think it was released. So it was inspired, he said, by seeing a couple kissing by the Berlin Wall, and that they weren't going to let something like the Berlin Wall get in the way of their love. And so he wrote this song, "We Can Be Heroes, even if it's just for one day," right? Which also I think does express some of the idea of this movie. You hear it. The mom says it a couple of times. What did they do? And she says, "What they could," right? And she tells Elsa, "You're alive today," right? And of course, she inspires what happens at the end of the movie too, which is the music starts to play. They're outside on the street for the first time, and they start to dance, right? Because dance while you can. By the way, another animal reference is her saying to Elsa, "You have to look the tiger right in the eye," which is and butterflies in the stomach. There's these animal references all throughout the movie. The butterflies actually are literal in a couple of scenes. One, when he falls in love, the movie actually shows us butterflies in his stomach. And then later on, just before he finds his mother, what he's doing is following a butterfly. And you actually see the color drain out of the movie in that scene, right? The last sort of colorful thing is that butterfly, and then it drains right out, So those are some of my thoughts. I'd certainly love to hear what you thought about it. And so I see Barb's hand up.
Babs.
Yeah.
In the movie, he had asked Elsa what she would do when she first got out, and she said she would dance.
Yeah.
And that's when we see her dancing.
Right.
You almost, because that's what she's going to be doing. Also, the book supposedly, from the one review I read, said that it was a serious book and there's no mention of Hitler in it. I would be curious about reading the story to see it, the serious angle of it, but probably won't.
Right. Yeah. As I was preparing for this, I thought, well, I really should have read the book, because I do like to know the differences, but just didn't have time to get to it before this. But, time being what it is, you're probably right. Neither of us will read it, but I'm very curious about it now. So if I can find it in the library, maybe I'll give it a quick scan just to see. But yeah, so the movie does a great job in a sense of foreshadowing what's going to happen, right? At the end. So, they have that conversation. What's the first thing you're going to do? I'm going to dance. And then of course the opportunity comes. So the movie does a nice job of foreshadowing that. Sue?
Yeah, now I did not rewatch it because Dick and I saw it when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not remember having a terribly negative opinion of it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the acting was superb. And I felt like this child was brainwashed by the Hitler Youth.
Mm-hmm.
And it took the movie, for him to change his mind.
Yeah.
And I thought the development of that was really interesting. And so, I mean, I don't think we weren't really turned off by it as much as we hated the Nazi.
Yeah, of course.
Nazi thing, of course.
Right.
But I did not have we did not have a terribly negative opinion of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that, knowing you, it doesn't really surprise me in the sense because of the kind of human that you are, being a good, humane person, right? But I do think it was hard for some people to get over that moment, as I was talking about earlier, of, the movie asking us to sympathize with a Nazi, right? And I'd say that as I said, all those other movies that poke fun at the Nazis, that are satirical, whatever, they don't usually ask us to do that. I mean, I can't think of one. They usually, they're more like the things that were even contemporary in the time of World War II, Spike Jones' song, "Der Führer's Face," right? Or the comedies, the cartoons and things, right? It's much more unusual to ask us to do this, to take this perspective on a child, even though he's just a child. This would be much harder if he was 17, I think, right? And it asked us to sympathize with him in the same way. And certainly if he was a grown man, it would be much harder for us to sympathize. But I think it was still hard for some people to do that.
Yeah.
So.
If I may just tell you of an experience, in the summer of 1963, when Dick was an officer in the Air Force, he was sent to Wiesbaden, Germany, to the Air Force base there on a temporary duty assignment. And I went with him. And so we toured West Germany. I mean, then it had to be West Germany, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And we traveled around a little bit. We went to Frankfurt and, you know, and we went to Cologne. But I will tell you, it was really hard for us at that point. I mean, you think this was 1963, and there was you could still see people with war injuries, and it was really hard as Jewish Americans for us to in any way have to interact with anybody that was German and an adult at that time.
Right.
It was very difficult.
I can certainly understand that. And I think, you know, to this day, I have not set foot in Germany. It's not so much, you know, it's no sort of political statement. It's more a question of, you know, sort of having the stomach for it in a way, you know. But I can only imagine what it was like then, you know, to be there when so much in the places were still being rebuilt. The people were actual, you know, they were in the German army, whether they were Nazis or not. They were fighting against American soldiers, and they were supporting the regime that was killing Jews, you know. So it's only at a remove, I think, that we can watch a movie like this and have sympathy for this child, right? It would be too much to expect, you know, if this movie had come out in 1960, you know, it'd be too much to expect people to have some sympathy, you know, I think in those days. But I do think, as I said, it was marketed as a movie that's anti-hate. And one of the points it's trying to make is something that we have learned, and we know that the best way to root out hate is to get to know somebody, right? You know, we've seen the dramatic change that has taken place in America about the rights of LGBTQIA folks, and one of the things that people point at is both images in the media that made it feel like there are gay people in your family, and actually having gay people in your family and getting to know people who are LGBTQIA makes the biggest difference in whether or not someone is loving and accepting or intolerant and bigoted, right? So this movie makes that case as well. It's easy to hate Jews if you've never met one, right? You have no idea, you know, if you're walking around thinking some of the things that he's thinking and drawing in his little book, you know, that, you know, we hang upside down like bats in people's houses when we sleep, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, right? If you, that you have horns and so forth. If you haven't met a Jew, you know, to know that we don't have horns, it's a lot easier to hate us and think we're some kind of animal and not a human being, right? So makes me think one of the other characters in the movie, you know, we should mention Klenzendorf, I believe is his name, K, right? The one, what is his name? Yeah, Klenzendorf, right? You can call me, I think, is it Captain K? Or I think. So an interesting character who has been a Nazi soldier, lost an eye fighting, and is now relegated to this kind of youth work that he's doing. But there's also something else going on with that character, I think, right? I mean, he's pretty clearly, I think, meant to be a closeted gay man, and has his lover working with him, and doesn't have it in for Jews at all. And, you know, he's jaded in the sense. I mean, there's a scene, I think, where Jojo asks him, you know, what happens if I if I see a Jew and tell somebody about it. And he says, well, of course, they'll kill the Jew, and then they'll kill anybody who helped the Jew. And then because the times are paranoid, they'll kill a few other people too, right? You know, it's a big deal. So you know, he doesn't give any sign of thinking that's a good idea. I mean, I think just the opposite. He's showing that he doesn't approve of this kind of craziness, you know, and he saves Elsa in that scene with the Gestapo. He comes to the house. There's no reason for him to be in the house except perhaps because he's intuited what's going on at the house because of some of the questions that Jojo has asked him, right? So he comes there, I think, expressly to save Jojo in particular and his family in general, and comes in and he's the one who looks at the papers, and even though she gets the birthday wrong, he saves her life, right? So so we see in him, and I would suggest that some of that is because he knows what it's like to have a secret of his own that he's hiding. He knows what would happen to him if people found out his secret. And of course, he and his partner keep that secret until the end when the Allies are coming. The Americans and the Russians are coming into this town. And he and his lover have created these insane flamboyant uniforms to wear and put on makeup and go out and, as we would have said in America in the 60s, let their freak flag fly, I guess, right? You know, let it all hang out. So it's an interesting characterization, certainly with some humor and some silliness, but there's something serious underpinning Klenzendorf, I think, as well. Yeah. Other thoughts?
You know, after reading Elie Wiesel, you know how important shoes are in the Holocaust.
Oh, yeah.
He thinks that, you know, he writes that, you know, he left home and his father said, put on your winter boots. And that's what saved him eventually. And I think what they did with shoes was just amazing. And the costumes were beautiful, but the scene where he, you know, you see the shoes.
Right. Yeah. Again, it's another one of those examples where the filmmaker is very carefully shows us those shoes.
Yeah.
Earlier in the movie, and I guess say if a filmmaker shows you something early in the movie, it's probably going to come back. It means something, right? So that's really great to mention Wiesel and the shoes. Because her shoes are not the only shoes that are shown. There's a whole thing about he doesn't know how to tie his own shoe. Yeah. And so another sort of metaphor for how he grows up in the course of the movie is that he now knows how to tie not only his own shoes, but in the scene where they're about to go out on the street for the first time at the end, he gets down on the floor and ties Elsa's shoe too before they go outside, right? So there's definitely something about shoes there. I would say, and you know, some of you I'm sure have visited Auschwitz over the years, and one of the things they take you through is a room full of shoes. You know, that's been replicated in the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. You know, but the shoes themselves are a sign of the people who once stood in them. So I think there's an element of that in there too. Also, in Budapest, I mean, one of the most evocative memorials to the Holocaust is the shoes at the side of the Danube River, right? So I think again, it's the shoes themselves. Right, he could have shown something else, right? You know, he didn't have to do it that way, and he could have been more. You know, he could have just shown her, right? So it's a very deliberate kind of act, I think, to the way he uses the shoes. Thanks for pointing that out. It's another one of the really interesting symbolic things that the director does here.
The other scene that I loved. And first of all, I thought that Elsa and Jojo had good rapport, and it was a back and forth. Is when they start naming all the he names all the famous Germans, and she names all the famous Jewish composers, and they just go back and forth and back and forth.
Right.
Yeah. It was just cute.
Yeah, the music does that a little bit too. I mean, so one of the pieces that comes up a few times in the movie is a waltz by Strauss, and I think that that's worth mentioning for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, apparently the Nazis, they loved Wagner, but they also loved Strauss. I mean, he was the waltz king and all these things, and they ignored the fact that he had Jewish ancestry, right? So again, choosing Strauss, there's a little bit of hidden something going on in the movie, choosing this. By the way, it's also that particular waltz, I think it's called Frühlingsstammen, the voice of spring. It's been used in all kinds of comedies in the last 60 or 70 years, going back to the Three Stooges. I can still hear in my head Curly of the Three Stooges saying the voice of spring, in his ridiculous voice, and the use of that particular waltz. It's in Bugs Bunny cartoons and Elmer Fudd. It accompanies Elmer Fudd sometimes, right? It's what else has it been in? I don't know. It's a half dozen different things, right? W.C. Fields movie. It's in Never Give a Sucker an Even Break. It's been used over and over in comedies. So I think that it's fascinating that he chose that one. The fact that it's the voice of spring, and we're coming up to the end of the war and all that kind of stuff. It has a vote. The version that's used in the movie has vocals. You can hear it on YouTube or something if you want to. And as soon as you hear it, you'll say, "Oh yeah, I've heard this 1,000 times," and things, right? So that's one of them. And so not only does he pick a piece, right, that the scene you're talking about, Vanessa, where they're going back and forth about famous Jews, famous Germans. Well, Strauss is kind of both, right?
Right.
So it's sort of interesting. Also uses a piece of the opera Faust, which I think Gounod was a French composer, I'm pretty sure, who wrote that. But the story of Faust, someone who sells his soul, I think applies nicely to Germany, right? In a sense, right? A cultured and educated country that sells its soul to the devil, in a sense. So again, I think very specific choices when it comes to the music. Those, of course, are pieces of music that would have been heard in that time. There's some others when there's the scene where she says, his mom says to him, "Come dance with your parents," right? Where she's put the soot on her face and she's imitated the father, and she's also the mother. And there's a couple of songs that play in that dinner scene. One is called Taboo by the Lecuana Cubana. So a hit back in the 30s, I guess, kind of a Cuban rhythm. And also you hear a little bit of the Dipsy Doodle, which was, I don't think you hear any of the vocals, but it's Ella Fitzgerald sang it, actually. But you hear just the music. But I did go and look it up, and the lyrics say, the Dipsy, let's see, what is it? The Dipsy Doodles, the thing to beware. The Dipsy Doodle will get in your hair. If it gets you, it couldn't be worse. The things you say will come out in reverse. And so even though the lyrics don't appear, I think there's something in there about characters in this movie and the way they think. And there's even a few moments there where Adolf talks to him. He doesn't know the term reverse psychology. So But just, this backwards mind trick that I'm teaching you, right? So I think these things all tie together in a strange way. There's some other 60s songs. There's a Roy Orbison song singing in German. I'm not sure why Roy Orbison recorded the song Mama in German, but he did. And it appears when they're riding their bicycles together away from the river. There's, what was the other one? Arthur Lee and the band Love. Maybe not as well known as anything else on the soundtrack, but the song, what's it called? Everybody's Gotta Live, and it comes up pretty close to the end of the movie, I think, over the scene where he's out looking for food and things, scraps to bring home. That's, and there's a Tom Waits song early in the movie too. So I don't want to grow up. So very interesting choice of music all around. Other thoughts? Well, I hope I've given you some new insights into it, some appreciation. See, I think it's at the end of the movie that words by Rilke come up just before the credits, the poet who's mentioned early on. And I wrote down, let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, just keep going, no feeling is final. Right? So I think maybe not the perfect summation of the movie, but certainly there's some parts of it that just keep going, right? I mean, that's part of the advice that's given to Elsa. It's kind of how the movie ends, right? What happens next to these two? I don't know. It doesn't exactly scream out for a sequel, but in a way it does. What happens to these two? She's older. When you're 10 and 17, that's a big age gap. A few years later, maybe it's not as big an age gap. Who knows what happens to these two? How will they survive? I mean, this is not going to be an easy world even after the war, certainly. So I think you just keep going, right? And certainly, at a young age, everything has happened to them. And I think that's what the movie makes a case for, that particularly for Jojo, that he knew beauty and he learned to know terror by the time it's all over, what no feeling is final gives us perhaps a moment to say, yeah, people can learn and change, right? We certainly, even now we're dealing with neo-Nazis and skinheads and things like that, but we also know about people who have been brainwashed and indoctrinated into those things, and they have changed and they have become productive members of society. So it is possible, as difficult as it may be. And it is sort of part of our faith tradition to understand that human beings have the ability to change. They have the ability to grow. They have to want to, and they have to work hard at it, but it is possible. And so the movie, I'd come back to that idea that it's an anti-hate movie rather than specifically about the time period that it takes place in. It actually came out not long after Charlottesville, I think, right? So yeah. 2019. So whether that was in the thoughts in production, pre-production, or post, I can't say, but the idea that these things are terrible, these people need to change, but there is the possibility that they can change. So well, thanks everybody. It's nice to see you, and thanks for coming on. And if we still have a few minutes if anybody's got something else to add, or a suggestion for another movie you'd like to talk about sometime, that's always welcome. You can send that to me or to Vanessa. And anything coming up, Vanessa, that we just mentioned?
So this Friday night is is it?
Tikkun Olam Shabbat. I know we've
Right.
got a guest
That's-
speaker.
yeah, we have a
from,
guest
Lake
speaker.
County Pads.
Yeah,
So he'll talk about pads and how it works with the homeless population in Lake County.
right.
So,
And we're collecting socks for pads. And there's no adult enrichment on Sunday.
Right.
Our speaker had to postpone. And for January, the classes are taking a break. The short story is taking a break. I may have our evening book club. And so it might be a good time to have an evening movie. So Rabbi and I will see what's out there. There's a lot of good things out there.
has
And-
anybody seen Shiva Baby? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
You need-
Vanessa can talk about that one.
Before you tell everyone to watch it, you need to watch it because
Yeah.
it's a little risque.
Yeah. Well,
That's
you know, for these nighttime ones, we've gone a little more risque.
Risque.
Shiva Baby?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we're going to do that or not, but I just thought
Shiva
I'd
Baby.
see if
It's-
anybody's seen it.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of it. Where do you see it?
It must have been on Netflix or Prime because I can quickly check. And also.
I'm not necessarily recommending it. I just wanted to see whether anybody has seen it.
I have a couple of suggestions, two good movies we saw lately within the past year. 6 Minutes to Midnight with Judi Dench. That was part of the J Film Festival.
Okay.
And Tango Shalom.
Oh, yes.
It's a comedy and it's very cute.
Yeah. Okay.
Where did I see that? It's on Netflix. It's on Amazon, I think.
Yeah. Let me take a look. I'll take a look at those.
Okay,
Thanks.
wait. Elaine, what were the names? Tango Shalom?
Tango Shalom.
Oh,
And-
that's.
It's a comedy. 6 Minutes to Midnight
6 minutes. to
with
midnight.
Judi Dench.
So it looks like Tango Shalom is on Amazon for $3.99 and 6 Minutes to Midnight. Oh, yeah. That's
I don't know where it is now.
right. It might be on. Yeah. Yeah. That's a little more
Sorry.
pricey.
That's a good one. It's a World War II movie, and I just read something about it somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to take a look at that one and see if we can find it in a place where we can see it.
Yeah.
Those are good suggestions. Thank you. So, okay, great.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Night, everybody. Have a good
anything-
evening.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.